project you're about to see is a big project, at least for me. And it's also a pretty big departure from my normal types of projects. This one doesn't have any electronics, doesn't have any 3D printing, it doesn't have any software. Nope, just wood, glass, a little glue, and some hard wax oil finish. Just 4 ingredients. But somehow this project took me months to complete.
Got lots of strips of wood. Lots of strips of wood.
Figuring out how to get started on something like this is always a challenge. I know that when it comes to making anything out of wood, the very first step is taking the giant chunks you buy at the store and turning them into smaller, more manageable chunks. So that's what I did. I had measurements from my 3D model, so I started by cutting the large pieces of walnut into the pieces I need. After getting something more manageable, I went over to the one new tool I purchased for this project, the planer. This is literally the first time I've ever used this tool, so I had some learning to do.
All right, feeling pretty good about that. These are all looking pretty good. Next thing to do is to cut 45. I have a stop block here, and I'm going to go through and cut all of these so they're nice and even. And then I'll flip it around and figure out the other side.
But before I get too deep into this, let me show you my mock-up. As you can see, it's going to hopefully be a table. It'll have glass inserts on all 4 sides and on the top. The top itself will be able to lift off so you can put things in the middle. Again, I'll get into the actual details of that as we progress. You may have already concluded this, but I definitely wouldn't call myself a woodworker. Sure, I have a lot of woodworking tools that I've collected over the years, mainly as a result of deciding that I would prefer to do some home project myself instead of paying someone else to do it. But this isn't just another DIY home improvement project. What I'm making here is actually furniture. And it's not just some random idea either. It's a gift for my wife. I'll get more into that later. After getting everything flat, square, and approximately the correct dimensions, I needed to start cutting the angles. The table, when you really break it down, is just 4 mitered frames with 45-degree angles on the sides. Put those all together to make a cube. So I started by making the cuts to make the 4 frames and the 45s on the sides.
Of what we're after here. This is one of the 4. And it just looks like picture frames right now, but then I can stand them all up on end and turn them into a box. Glass in the middle, and then make a top. I think I need to cut the 45s on these. Alright, so I'm pretty positive that I got all the crazy miter cuts done. These are all 45s this way, and then I had to cut these little corners out, which was a little challenging. And then for the sides, they all have this nice 45 on them. So that way when I make them into a frame, I can then put them into a box shape. It'll make more sense when I start putting it together.
That last part ended up being a mistake.
Some mistakes were made. So first off, I did sand everything. All these have been sanded at least with one pass. And that's just to make it a little bit easier later. That was not the mistake. The mistake happened way earlier. So these side pieces, I cut this, thinking that if I made all the cuts early, then I'd be able to put these together and be done with the cutting, right? Make 4 of these and then put those 4 together into a box to make the final table. The problem is that there's nothing to clamp to now. This is the new plan. These are the offcuts from those sides here. I'm going to take these and I'm going to tape them back on here to make it so I get a nice square edge. And then I am going to clamp them together using these, I don't know what they're called, frame clamps or something like that, but essentially 4 pieces. And then just glue it and clamp it together so it's a solid piece.
Now, more about the tools. I did all of this with a table saw, a chop saw, a sander, a planer, a router, and a multi-tool. Yeah, like I said, I'm not really a woodworker.
All right, got one. I am so relieved. All right, progress has been made. I put this whole thing together. I made the other 2 frame pieces off camera, but dry fit the whole thing together. It's looking okay. I'm actually pretty okay with this. A couple things that stood out, all related to the original mistake I made. You can see there's a gap here, and that's because this top piece is sticking out a little too far. Essentially, this problem exists in a few different places. This wide gap here is the same thing. These top pieces are sticking out further than these ones running up. So I need to go and just kind of saw it flat. Woodworking isn't perfect. You just have to make sure that you don't show the parts where you screwed up.
So yeah, mistakes. I guess that was bound to happen since I've literally never done anything like this before. But one thing I know from watching a bunch of woodworking videos on YouTube is that there is always a way to correct a mistake. In this case, after taping up those cutoffs so I could actually glue this thing together, I trimmed up the bits that were sticking off too far using various methods, including a router, a multi-tool, and some hand saws.
Take the router here, and I'm going to run it around the inside to cut a 1/4 inch groove all the way around the inside of each one of these, and that's going to make a spot to set the glass inside, and then I'll be able to put some clips on to hold the glass in place. I'm going to take the Ultra Vibe 10,000 and freaking hammer it out here.
Look, I did what I had to do. None of these tools were designed for high precision woodworking, and none of them are super expensive compared to what you could potentially pay if you were looking to buy high end stuff. So I knew that there would be challenges ahead when it came to the tools, but I figured I could still figure it out.
Right out. So yeah, I get it. This abomination of a tool does not belong in a wood shop, but this is not a wood shop. So it actually worked out pretty good.
It was enough to make it usable, so it was finally time to make all these squares into cubes. The glue up technique I used here is highly recommended. It honestly made it super easy. Just tape the seams with everything lying flat, then carefully flip the whole thing over, apply the glue, and fold it up. I can't really say enough positive things about these frame clamps. I use them on almost every glue up in the build, and they work great. Just make sure you fine tune where the seams meet before you walk away, and you're all good. I have a couple 90-degree clamps that help me keep the whole thing square. The next day, remove the clamps, and voila, it's almost a table. I think woodworking is both terrifying and satisfying. It's also both permanent and somehow forgiving. Making rookie mistakes is something that I guess is expected from a rookie. But what I learned from this whole process is that with some planning and creative thinking, you can reduce your chances of mistakes while also correcting the ones that were made.
Okay, for my next trick, I'm going to try to fix that gap with a little bit of stuff that I saw on the internet, as usual. And what I saw was you can take a little bit of sawdust, which I have here. It's pretty good with the gap filled in like that. Take a little bit of super glue, or fancy woodworkers call it CA glue, and then hardener.
Next, I had to figure out the bottom. I always planned on making the bottom out of simple plywood, mainly because once this table is filled with horse ribbons, again, I'll explain that later, the bottom would never be seen. So, save on material and just get something in there. So I cut the plywood to size, sanded it, and then stained it with some stain I had lying around. It doesn't match very well, but like I said before, nobody's ever going to see this. The issue with the bottom is that I had not really considered how I would actually attach it to the table. So after staring at it for a while, I realized that this table would look a lot better with feet, and I could use those feet to hold the bottom on. I used some walnut cutoffs to make the feet and pretty much just made it up on the fly. I took some 45-degree corners and cut them into these 4-sided shapes. I then cut 45-degree miters on the edges of the two sides and glued them together to make the little corner feet. To glue these up, I learned from my previous mistake and attached clamping blocks to them. I then used the same tape trick and applied both super glue and wood glue and clamped them together. The bottom is essentially sandwiched between the feet on the bottom of the table and these cutoffs, the same ones I used for fixing my clamping problem earlier, on the top. I cut the cutoffs and then used super glue and wood glue to hold them in place.
No, I don't think so.
I could then flip the table over and attach the feet because now the bottom is resting on the lip I made with the cutoffs. To make sure I got the feet placed with a consistent spacing, I made this little spacer and then I just attached the feet with super glue for now. With all that in place, I drilled some holes through the feet, the base, and the table and attached them all together with countersunk screws. Now I gotta be honest with you, after making the whole table and everything I learned, I was feeling pretty confident about making the top. The top itself is really a lid. It's designed to lift off and it also has a groove cut in it so the glass top would sit inside. So making the top was a lot of rinse and repeat. Get the boards to the correct width using the table saw, put the boards through the planer to get them to the right thickness, cut them to length and at the right angles so they would make a square. Okay, it's about time I actually tell you why I'm making this table and why my wife wanted it so badly. My wife is a horseback rider and she competes in competitions. It's not anything super extravagant though. It's not like she's making a living by riding horses. Actually, it's the opposite of that. We both work full-time jobs and riding is her hobby. So one of the side effects of riding in competitions is ribbons. Most of the time, that's the only prize. And over time, you end up with a lot of ribbons. That's the purpose of this table. She saw something online that kind of resembled the table I'm making, but it was made of pine and it was stained black. She asked me if I could make something similar, and here we are. Really, the hardest part of the top was getting all the boards cut to the exact right length. Since it's a lid, there's a top frame and then the sides. The top frame needed to fit into the box that created the sides, and all the miters needed to align perfectly. I definitely didn't get this right on the first attempt. The trick was to just make very small adjustment cuts on all the pieces until it worked out. Just sneaking up on the correct size eventually landed me with a perfect fit. And since I learned from my previous mistakes on gluing up complicated stuff, I first glued the L-shaped sides together, then I took all 4 L-shaped sides and glued those together to make a lid. For the finish of this table, I'm using Rubio Monocoat. I'm not going to give a ton of detail here because there are a million videos on how to apply Rubio, but I chose the finish because it looks good, it's easy to apply, and it's pretty forgiving for someone that has never attempted to get a good finish on something that'll end up being furniture. All I really did here was sand the table down to 160 grit, clean the table with some denatured alcohol and then water, and then finally apply the finish. Rubio comes with pretty clear instructions when it comes to mixing the two parts. After getting it mixed, I liberally applied one coat and wiped it with a towel. After about 15 minutes, I used a clean towel to wipe any excess material. And believe it or not, that's the whole process. Just make sure to wet down your towels after you use them so they don't catch fire in the garbage can. Because they will if you have the right conditions. What do you think? Personally, watching all this footage from start to end has kind of left me a bit shocked that it turned out as good as it did. I made a lot of mistakes along the way, but I was able to recover. Next, I put some simple clips around the inside of the box to attach the glass. I would have filmed the installation of the glass, but there's a story around that, and it's a good one. I had this final touch I wanted to apply. I thought it'd be nice to have my wife's monogram etched into the front piece of glass, so I ordered the glass online from a site called One Day Glass. One Day Glass was not the troublemaker here. I actually highly recommend the site if you're looking for custom glass. I got exactly what I ordered, and it fit perfectly. The problem was the etching. I ended up ordering the replacement glass myself and taking it back to get etched. They did pay for the replacement glass, but overall, the whole situation could have been handled way better. So here's the final product. If you're still watching at this point, I assume you enjoyed the video. Please consider subscribing and liking the video so YouTube will offer it to more people. Thanks for sticking around. Until next time, I hope I helped you learn faster.